Hi, and welcome to another episode of Hot Takes with me, the Silver Fox. There is a gap in the law that is being described as a loophole, but it's actually an absolutely necessary thing if you want to maintain private rental properties in Scotland. The Scottish Government and the Greens in particular are looking to close this particular thing. We're going to look at this. And if they do, they are driving the last nail into rental properties in Scotland. And it will just increase homelessness virtually overnight. If this is taken away, I think landlords in Scotland will just sell up. And when there are no rental properties left, who's going to benefit? Because it certainly won't be homeless people looking for somewhere to live, or people who need to move for their jobs, or people who just literally cannot get a mortgage because they either don't earn enough or have bad credit ratings. It's a marvellous sign of genius yet again by the Greens, who want to ensure that misery is spread to every single part of the nation. We'll take a look at it and see what this, quote, loophole is. But it is madness, because of course it is. Here goes. Now, you really couldn't make this up. It's a level of stupidity beyond what I think anyone could ever deal with. Loophole in ScotGov rent cap blamed as bill rises hit record levels. A loophole in the Scottish Government's rent controls to help households in the cost of living crisis, which isn't anything to do with rent control, I don't know why, is being blamed for record levels in bill rises among private tenants. Now, of course, we've said what this is. It's between tenancies. So you come to the end of your tenancy, you leave, new one comes in, a new private rental agreement is made between the landlord and the tenant, and away you go. But the SNP Green Alliance think that's not good enough. How dare you put the prices up? That makes us look bad because it lifts what it's against the principle, is what they're saying. Well, if you don't allow it to happen, landlords will leave the market in droves, in tens of thousands. And at the moment, any kind of social housing is filled with those on benefits, because a lot of landlords just will not take benefit tenants because of the problems. And so two private individuals, the landlord and the prospective tenant, neither of whom are on benefits, one of whom is working, the other is the landlord, should be able to come to a private arrangement about what they say between them is a fair level of rent, one that the landlord can get for his property, one that the tenant is happy to pay. But whether the tenant is happy to pay or not, or can afford it or not, or anything, it's got nothing to do with local authorities. But the SNP Green Alliance say it should, and that the local authorities should be able to interfere in a private contract. And that's just weird. They shouldn't be allowed to do it. And if they do, the landlords will leave. Now, at the moment, as I mentioned, the social tenants, they all go into social housing. Whereas private landlords tend not to take social tenants, because if you're on benefits, what happens is the council pays you, the tenant, your housing benefit, which you then are supposed to hand over to the landlord. But of course, that doesn't necessarily always happen. And soon you're behind, you're in arrears, landlord isn't getting his money, and the landlord then has to work out how to get you out. This is why the landlords are made to look bad. They're, oh look, you're making a family homeless. No, the landlord is not making the family homeless. The person who's receiving the rent money and not paying it over is making the family homeless. They are choosing to spend the rent money. It is they who are making the family homeless, not the landlord. Now, an example of this was many years ago, a company I worked for. It was a house builder, and we had maybe 100 rental properties. And this is we had a lot of commercial units, but we're talking about private homes. We had about 100 rental properties, and regular as clockwork. Local council, local authorities would ring it up and say, look, we see you've got this property for rent, you put it out there. Could we put one of our tenants in it? And My old boss would sit there and say, certainly, but this is how it works. You, the council, will become the tenant, and then you sublet it. And that way, we rent the property to you, you pay the rent, you sublet it, and you get the rent back from your tenant. Oh, no, that's not how it works, said the council. He says, well, it is, he said, if you want to use one of my houses. And he put the phone down. And the problem got worse and worse and worse. And eventually they phoned him up and said, look, okay, we'll do it that way. And in the end, I think they had about 40 houses with the council being the tenant. And every third or fourth of the month, whatever, all this money came in without fail from the council. But the amazing stupidity is here that the council paid us the rent, and so they had the house. They then sublet it to someone on benefits. They handed the rent to the tenant, who was then supposed to hand it back to the council as rent. So they hand the tenant the this housing benefit money, and then they take that back as rent money. Often they didn't get it back, or they didn't get it back in full, and then the tenants were in arrears, and it was the council then having to evict the tenants for non-payment of rent. And as soon as they were made homeless with children, the council then put them back on the list to be housed because they had a legal obligation to do so. And they put a new family in the house that they just kicked the old family out of because the old family weren't paying their rent. And it was going round in circles. And this is why private landlords don't take on people on benefits. Now, they're trying to change the law saying, oh, you're not allowed to discriminate. And of course you get around that. Well, we just do a credit check. As long as you pass your credit check, you're fine. We don't care if you're working or not, so long as you pass the credit check. And that's your get out of jail free card, isn't it? And so that's what they do because of all the problems. So if the council have not got enough room in social housing to deal with it now, how bad is it going to be when all these private landlords sell up and private tenants who would otherwise be able to come to an arrangement with a landlord and pay whatever the landlord's asking can't, because there's no houses to rent, and an entire city dies because there's no rental property, and all these people who work in that city either have to go and find a new job elsewhere or go to the council and say, I need somewhere to live, can you find me some social housing? And the council go, well, we haven't got any. I go, well, there we go. So, well, can't you go into rental? I went, no, because your party's policy has destroyed the rental market and there is literally nowhere to rent. And you're going to be in a position where there's people working and possibly earning a good wage who are effectively homeless because they can find nowhere to live because of the SNP Green Alliance and its mindless policy of destruction of the private rental industry. Why they target this, nobody knows. It is an absolute mind-blowingly stupid thing to do. And wherever, and I mean literally in every case, wherever there has been rent controls, intertenancy rises are always huge. Now you have 3% allowed, and it was been like that through the COVID years as well. Only allowed to raise rent by 3%. But inflation was running at 10%. And what are the landlords to do? The only time they can actually make their money back is between tenancies. Now, if they are going to start bringing it in that they're going to rent control between tenancies, you can guarantee then that every rent that goes in now, between now and then bringing that law in, is going to be 15, 20, 25%. And they'll get it. They'll put it up as big as they can. And they'll get it. Or they'll sell up. And it's going to be that. These people in government, the SNP Green Alliance, are absolutely moronic. Anyway, I'm not going to read all this. It's a very, very long article, which I'm not going to go into. It was just I just felt I needed to sort of let loose on what the problem is. But basically, housing campaigners, just do this a little bit to show you the thing. Housing campaigners are now calling for a rethink of rent control regime to close the loophole and include all new tenants as well. And the Scottish Government insisted the vast majority of in-tenancy rises covered by the rent rise cap will have been within the maximum level that they have sent since April 2023. And details of the rent hikes have come despite the then First Minister Nicola Sturgeon announcing a rent freeze in September last year to beat the cost of living crisis. So there was the rent freeze last year, not allowed to put it up at all, and then from April this year you're only allowed to put it up to 3%, and that's going to carry on until March next year. Now if it does stop at March next year, guarantee the rents will go up massively, because landlords aren't charities, they are businesses. And landlords aren't all bad. Yes, there are bad landlords, but most landlords are good. They'll work with the tenants. You ask a landlord what gold is and he'll tell you it's long-term tenants who look after the property. And if you get a long-term tenant who looks after the property, you don't put the rent up. You know, you put it up as little as you can afford to put it up, because you want to keep those tenants in there, because they are worth their weight in gold. And that is what the SNP Greens don't see. The system looks after itself. Simple economics. The landlord knows what a good tenant is, and the landlord knows how to keep them. Bad tenants, you put the price them out. That's what you do with bad tenants. You keep putting the rents up in order they can't pay it until they go, and then you get the good tenants in, and so forth. That's how you deal with it. But protecting tenants through this rent control doesn't do anything for the cost of living crisis. Perhaps other policies, like not pissing away hundreds of millions of pounds on pointless independence things, could be better spent looking after people. Who knows? Just me. Don't blame the landlords. Don't blame the housing market. Blame the government for creating the problems in the housing market. Anyway, I shall stop there and come up. Now, of course, we're honest, there's no easy fix. It's going to be a hard fix. But the problem here is that the only reason it's going to be a hard fix is because of the policies of the SNP. If they hadn't interfered, then market forces alone would look after the market. You cannot put the rent up indefinitely. There is only so much that the market can carry. And once you hit that level, that's it. And that's the point where tenants are happy to pay, because most of the tenants in private houses are working. You hit the point where tenants are prepared to pay and where the landlord is prepared to accept. That's market forces. To change and get involved in that arbitrarily, just by picking a number out of your backside, like they've done, 3%. There's no reason for 3%. Why 3%? Especially when you're living in a time when inflation is 10%. Madness. And then, of course, you're seeing, like I say, you're seeing all these private houses coming, all these private rentals coming off the market, and people are going, why is there nowhere to live anymore? SNP policy. It's down to them. Sturgeon, Humza Yousaf, the Greens, they're the ones spreading misery, poverty and homelessness, because they're all thick. They all fail to see the consequences of their virtue signalling actions. Anyway, I shall stop there. Thank you very much. It's rather a long video. I do apologise, but it is something I had to rant on, because I do feel it's important, because this is where a policy directly harms people, and you can see it. It's directly harming them, and they don't care. Anyway, until next time, stay safe, stay well, and for heaven's sake, fight to get these people out, and let's have some sanity back in politics. Bye.